The night Johnny Carson failed, and one letter saved everything. 11 words that changed television forever. 1992. Johnny Carson's final broadcast. 30 years hosting Tonight Show. Reporters asked, "What was your worst night?" Johnny smiled. October 1st, 1962. My first show. Complete failure. But, he paused. One viewer wrote me a letter the next day. 11 words. I kept that letter for 30 years. Read it before every single show. What did that letter say? And who sent it? If you're already feeling this story, drop a like and tell me where you're watching from. Because what happened on Johnny Carson's worst night became the foundation for his greatest career. 30 years earlier. October 1st, 1962. NBC Studios, New York City. Johnny Carson was 36 years old. He'd been chosen to replace Jack Paar as host of The Tonight Show, the biggest job in television. Millions watching. Careers made or destroyed in one night. Johnny had been preparing for months. Writing jokes. Rehearsing timing. Memorizing every cue. Every camera angle. Every entrance. He was ready. Or so he thought. 5:30 p.m. 2 hours before taping. Johnny stood backstage in his dressing room, staring at himself in the mirror. Gray suit. Thin black tie. Hair perfectly combed. He looked the part. But inside, his stomach twisted into knots. "You're going to be fine," his producer said, knocking on the door. "Jack Paar's gone. This is your show now." Johnny nodded. Tried smiling. Failed. Because deep down, Johnny knew the truth, he wasn't Jack Paar. He wasn't smooth. Wasn't charming. Wasn't naturally funny in the polished, effortless way Paar had been. Johnny was a Nebraska kid who'd worked his way up through local radio stations and game shows. He'd bombed 100 times before. Failed more than he'd succeeded. But this was different. This was The Tonight Show. This was everything. 7:25 p.m. 5 minutes to airtime. Johnny stood behind the curtain. He could hear the audience settling into their seats. 300 people. 300 strangers expecting brilliance. Ed McMahon appeared beside him. Ed was Johnny's announcer, his only ally in this terrifying moment. "You ready?" Ed asked. Johnny's hands were shaking. "No." Ed put a hand on Johnny's shoulder. "Good. That means you care." The stage manager counted down, 60 seconds. Johnny closed his eyes. Took a breath. Tried remembering why he'd said yes to this impossible job. 30 seconds. The orchestra started playing the Tonight Show theme music. 10 seconds. Ed McMahon walked through the curtain first. His voice boomed, "From New York, it's The Tonight Show. Starring Johnny Carson." The audience applauded. Johnny waited. Counted to 3. Then walked through the curtain. Into the brightest lights he'd ever seen. Into the biggest moment of his life. The disaster begins. The applause died down. Johnny stood at center stage. Microphone in hand. 300 people staring at him. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Panic. He'd rehearsed this opening line 100 times. But standing there, under those lights, with those eyes watching, his mind went blank. 5 seconds of silence. An eternity. Finally, Johnny forced out his first joke, "I'm a little nervous tonight." Which is good, because if I wasn't nervous, I'd be unconscious. The audience chuckled. Polite. Not real laughs. Pity laughs. Johnny pushed forward. "Second joke, they told me hosting this show would be easy. They lied. I've been awake for 3 days preparing, and I still don't know what I'm doing." Silence. Nobody laughed. Johnny's smile froze on his face. Third joke, Jack Paar left some big shoes to fill. "I wear a size 9. So, I'm in trouble." One person laughed in the back. One. Johnny could feel sweat forming on his forehead. His hands trembled holding the microphone. This was supposed to be his moment. His introduction to America. His chance to prove he belonged. Instead, he was dying. After the monologue, which felt like an hour but lasted 8 painful minutes, Johnny sat behind his desk. Time for the first guest. Except the guest wasn't there. The scheduled guest, a famous Broadway actress, had canceled last minute. The backup guest got stuck in traffic. NBC scrambled to find someone, anyone, to fill the time. They found a juggler. A juggler nobody had ever heard of. He juggled for 3 minutes. Dropped 2 balls. Left the stage. The audience sat in confused silence. Johnny tried making small talk with Ed McMahon. Tried filling time. Tried pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. The band played out of sync. The timing was off. The whole show felt chaotic, unrehearsed, amateur. By the end of the broadcast, Johnny knew. He'd failed. After the cameras stopped. 11 p.m. The show ended. Johnny walked off stage without speaking to anyone. Went straight to his dressing room. Locked the door. Sat down on the couch. Put his head in his hands. And for the first time in years, cried. Outside, he could hear the crew packing equipment. Voices discussing tomorrow's show. Business as usual. But Johnny knew there wouldn't be a tomorrow. Not for him. Someone knocked on the door. Johnny? You okay? It was Ed. Go away. Johnny, come on. It wasn't that bad. Ed? Please. Just, leave me alone. Ed hesitated. Then walked away. Johnny sat there in silence for 2 hours. Finally, around 1 a.m., he stood up. Looked at himself in the mirror. 36 years old. The biggest opportunity of his life. And he'd blown it. He drove home through empty New York streets. Climbed the stairs to his apartment. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., one thought kept repeating in his mind. I'm not good enough. I never was. The morning after. October 2nd, 1962. 9 a.m. NBC executives met in a conference room. The ratings from Johnny's first show had come in overnight. They were bad. Not just bad. Terrible. Viewership had dropped 40% compared to Jack Parr's final broadcast. Critics were already writing scathing reviews. The phones were ringing with complaints. The network vice president slammed his fist on the table. We made a mistake. Carson's not ready. He'll never be ready. Johnny's producer defended him. It was one show. Give him time. Time? We don't have time. This is the Tonight Show. We can't afford another disaster like last night. The room erupted in arguments. Fire Johnny now. Give him another chance. Find a replacement immediately. While they argued, a male clerk named Dorothy walked past the conference room carrying a stack of letters. Viewer mail from the previous night's broadcast. Most were complaints. But one envelope caught her attention. Plain white. Handwritten address. Return address from Columbus, Ohio. Something about it felt different. Dorothy opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. 11 words underlined at the bottom. Dorothy read it. Then read it again. Then ran to the producer's office. 11 words. The producer was about to walk into the executive meeting when Dorothy burst through his door. You need to see this. Right now. She handed him the letter. He read it quickly. His face changed. Who wrote this? Someone in Ohio. A schoolteacher, I think. The producer walked into the conference room and held up the letter. Before we make any decisions, you need to hear this. He read it aloud. Dear Mr. Carson, I watched your first show last night. I'll be honest, it was terrible. Your jokes didn't land. Your timing was off. You looked terrified. But here's what I noticed. You didn't pretend to be someone else. Jack Parr was smooth and polished. You're not. And that's exactly why I'm going to watch again tomorrow. Because you were yourself. Nervous. Imperfect. Real. Television is full of people pretending to be perfect. We don't need another one. We need someone honest. So here's what I'm asking you to do. The producer paused. Read the final 11 words slowly. You bombed. But you were yourself. That's rare. Keep doing that. The room went silent. The vice president stared at the letter. Who wrote this? Ruth Henderson. Schoolteacher. Columbus, Ohio. A schoolteacher? Yes. The vice president sat back in his chair. Thinking. Finally, he spoke, give Carson one more week. If he stays himself, whatever that means, we'll see what happens. The letter reaches Johnny. October 2nd, 1962. 2 p.m. Johnny sat in his apartment. He hadn't showered. Hadn't eaten. Hadn't answered the phone. He'd already decided, he was going to quit before NBC fired him. Someone knocked on his door. Johnny ignored it. More knocking. Johnny, it's me. Open up. Ed McMahon. Johnny dragged himself to the door. Opened it. Ed held out the letter. You need to read this. Johnny took it. Started reading. When he reached the 11 underlined words, his hand stopped shaking. You bombed. But you were yourself. That's rare. Keep doing that. Johnny read it 3 times. Then looked at Ed. Who wrote this? A teacher in Ohio. Never even heard of her. Johnny stared at the letter. Someone he'd never met. Someone who'd watched him fail. Someone who saw something he couldn't see in himself. Honest. Real. Different. NBC wants to fire me, don't they? Johnny asked. Ed nodded. They wanted to. This letter changed their minds. You've got one more week. Johnny folded the letter carefully. Put it in his pocket. One more week, he repeated. He walked to his bathroom. Looked at himself in the mirror. Still the same face. Same nervous eyes. Same Nebraska kid who didn't belong in New York. But maybe that was the point. Maybe trying to be Jack Parr was the mistake. Maybe being Johnny Carson was enough. The second night. October 3, 1962. The Tonight Show. Second broadcast. Johnny stood backstage again. Same gray suit. Same thin tie. Same terrified feeling. But this time, he held Ruth Henderson's letter in his pocket. Before walking through the curtain, he pulled it out. Read the 11 words one more time. You bombed. But you were yourself. That's rare. Keep doing that. He put it back. Took a breath. Walked onto the stage. The applause started. Johnny raised his hand to quiet them. Good evening, everyone. I'm Johnny Carson. And before we start tonight's show, I need to say something. The audience went silent. Last night was a disaster. You all know it. I know it. Even my mother called and said, Johnny, what were you thinking? A few people laughed. Real laughs this time. But someone wrote me a letter. And that letter said something I needed to hear. They said I should stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to be someone I'm not. Just be myself. Johnny looked directly at the camera. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be nervous. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to be awkward and weird and probably bomb a lot more times. He smiled. But at least I'll be honest about it. The audience erupted in applause. Not pity applause. Real applause. Because for the first time, Johnny wasn't pretending. He was just being himself. And that second show? Still wasn't perfect. Johnny stumbled over jokes. Forgot a guest's name. Laughed at his own mistakes. But it was real. And people loved it. 30 years of 11 words. From that night forward, Johnny Carson kept Ruth Henderson's letter with him. Every single show. For 30 years. Before walking onto the stage, he would pull it out. Read those 11 words. You bombed. But you were yourself. That's rare. Keep doing that. It became his ritual. His reminder. When shows went badly, he'd read it and remember, honesty mattered more than perfection. When ratings dropped, he'd read it and remember, being real was rare. When critics attacked him, he'd read it and remember, he wasn't trying to be anyone else. Johnny never framed the letter. Never put it on display. Never told anyone about it except Ed McMahon. It stayed in his jacket pocket. Folded and worn. Ink fading. Paper softening from being touched so many times. But those 11 words stayed sharp. Who was Ruth Henderson? Ruth Henderson was 54 years old when she wrote that letter. She taught mathematics at a high school in Columbus, Ohio. Widowed. No children. Lived alone. She wasn't a Johnny Carson fan. She'd watched his first show by accident. Her television was already on after the news. She almost turned it off when she saw how badly he was failing. But something stopped her. She recognized the fear in his eyes. The desperation to be liked. The painful awareness of his own inadequacy. Ruth had felt that way her entire life. As a woman teaching math in the 1960s, she was constantly underestimated. Constantly told she didn't belong. Constantly pressured to be someone softer, quieter, more feminine. But Ruth refused. She taught math because she loved it. She spoke her mind because silence felt like death. She lived authentically even when the world wanted her to pretend. So when she saw Johnny Carson fail on national television, but fail honestly, she understood. He wasn't pretending to be smooth. Wasn't pretending to be confident. He was just himself. And that was rare. So Ruth wrote the letter. She never expected a response. Never told anyone she'd written it. Never watched The Tonight Show again. She died in 1979, 17 years after writing those 11 words. She never knew that Johnny Carson kept her letter for 30 years. Never knew that her words saved his career. Never knew that she changed television history. The final broadcast. May 22, 1992. Johnny Carson's final Tonight Show. After 30 years. 11,000 episodes. Millions of laughs. Near the end of the broadcast, Johnny reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a worn, faded letter, held it up to the camera. "I've never shown this to anyone outside NBC," Johnny said. "But tonight feels like the right time." He unfolded it carefully. The paper nearly tore. "This letter arrived the day after my first show in 1962. That show was a complete disaster. I thought my career was over. But someone in Ohio wrote me these words." Johnny read the 11 words aloud. "You bombed. But you were yourself. That's rare. Keep doing that." His voice cracked slightly. "For 30 years, I read this before every show. Every single show." He looked at the camera. "Because Ruth Henderson, a schoolteacher I never met, understood something I didn't. Being yourself matters more than being perfect." Johnny folded the letter, put it back in his pocket. "So if you're watching tonight and you're afraid of failing, fail anyway. Just do it honestly. Someone out there needs to see that. Someone like me needed Ruth's letter." He smiled. "Be yourself. Even when it's terrifying. Even when you bomb." The audience stood. Applauded for 5 straight minutes. Johnny sat there, hand on his pocket, feeling that letter one last time. 30 years. 11 words. One truth. What happened to the letter? After Johnny Carson died in 2005, his family went through his belongings. They found Ruth Henderson's letter in the pocket of the suit he'd been wearing the day he died. 30 years after his final broadcast. 43 years after it was written. Still with him. Johnny's widow, Alexis, donated the letter to the Library of Congress. It's preserved there now, behind glass, next to other pieces of television history. But before donating it, Alexis had it photographed and framed. She sent copies to Ruth Henderson's family in Ohio. Ruth's niece, Margaret, received the package in 2006. She opened it and started crying. "Aunt Ruth never told us," Margaret said in an interview years later. "She never mentioned the letter. Never bragged about it. Never even watched The Tonight Show." Margaret framed the copy. Hung it in her living room. Below it, she added a small plaque with 11 words of her own. "Be yourself. Even when you're terrified. Someone needs to see it." The lesson we forget. Johnny Carson's first show was a disaster. Critics hated it. NBC wanted to fire him. Viewers complained. But one person, a schoolteacher in Ohio who'd never written fan mail before, saw something nobody else did. She saw honesty. In a world of polished performances and manufactured charm, Johnny Carson was real. Nervous. Imperfect. Flawed. And that mattered. Because most of us are terrified of being ourselves. We think we need to be smoother. Funnier. Better. We think failing means we're not good enough. But Ruth Henderson understood the truth. Failing while being yourself is better than succeeding while pretending to be someone else. Johnny Carson built a 30-year career on that truth. Not because he never failed again. He did. Constantly. But because he failed honestly. And honesty, it turns out, is rare. If you're reading this, maybe you're about to start something big. Maybe you're terrified you'll fail. Maybe you're wondering if you're good enough. Here's what Johnny Carson would tell you. You're probably going to bomb. At least once. Maybe 100 times. Your first attempt will be rough. Imperfect. Embarrassing. But if you do it honestly, if you stay yourself even when it's terrifying, someone out there will notice. Someone like Ruth Henderson. Someone who sees the fear in your eyes and recognizes it. Someone who understands that being real is rarer and more valuable than being perfect. You don't need to be smooth. You don't need to be polished. You just need to be yourself. Even when you bomb. Especially when you bomb. Because that's when people see who you really are. And that's what they'll remember. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who's afraid to fail. Drop a comment. Have you ever failed at something and had someone tell you it was okay to be yourself? Because we all need our own version of Ruth Henderson's letter. 11 words that remind us being real matters more than being perfect. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.